Growing plants is getting harder, more expensive, more complex, increasingly more difficult. I'm Chad Masura, CEO and founder of Rosy, and this is How We Grow. Today, I'm joined by Jules Giuliano, who leads soil research here at Rosy Soil. Jules is one of the people who has been deep in the actual testing, trialing, and problem solving behind our mixes. So I'm super excited to pull him into the conversation today and talk through what his work really looks like, and dive into his background, which spans organic farming, vermicompost, cannabis cultivation, urban farming, soil education, you name it, which means he brings a very practical lean into his work here and into the soil science. In this episode, we're going to get into what it takes to build a better potting mix, especially when you're trying to move away from the usual peat, perlite, synthetic fertilizer playbook. We'll talk biochar, we'll talk microbes, ingredient choices, testing, all of that fun stuff, and ultimately what growers should actually look for when they're trying to understand whether a soil is doing its job. So Jules, super excited to have you on today. Thanks for joining. Excited to chat.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
All right, sweet. So let's dive into it. I mean, I'd love to just start with your story. Like, let's share with the audience, how'd you go from garden educator to vermicompost to cannabis to urban farming to your work at Rodale? Tell me the quick story.
Yeah, so it's been a whirlwind. I started agriculture back in 2018 in Chicago. So I was actually in a completely different field. I was doing community organizing and policy research, and the company I worked for had to close in a matter of 2 weeks. And so I was kind of just like, what do I want to do? And I kind of wanted to have a career change. I wanted to get into something else. And so I found this job working with a nonprofit called Gardeneers that does school gardening for K through 12 students. And so I was teaching them how to plant, how to seed, how to grow, how to harvest, how to cook, everything that you're growing, and then about environmentalism, about nutrition, about soil health. And what we learned was that when you introduce children to vegetables at a younger age, they're more likely to try them when they're older. And so this kind of is a way to give back to the community, to get folks to eat healthier, to connect with the land. And so that was kind of my foray into gardening and farming, was through school gardening.
Did you know anything about gardening prior to that, or were you kind of learning alongside the kids?
I was learning alongside the kids. My mom was a gardener, so I would garden with her, but it was never something I took a deep interest in. So I knew how to do it, but it wasn't it wasn't something that I enjoyed day to day yet. And so I think being, I remember working with these pre-K students, and we would be digging up potatoes and stuff, and they would just be ripping them all up and throwing them up in the air and stuff. But I think they were so curious about the world, about worms, about how the soil worked, about how things grow. And I think that gave me a deep fascination for agriculture, for farming. And so, the kids definitely were the reason I got started into this work. But yeah, I was at Gardeneers for a year in Chicago. So half my time was school gardening, half my time was urban farming on the west side. So working a production vegetable farm, doing all organics, using a small scale tractor, doing row crop farming, mostly organic annuals. And so, yeah, that year really gave me the bug for agriculture. And so after that, I moved into a vermicompost company called Nature's Little Recyclers and Healthy Soil Compost. Essentially what we would do is we would take residential and restaurant scraps, old compost, we would put them onto a bike essentially, and I would be biking around the city picking up people's compost scraps essentially. So I was a organic trash man essentially. And we would take all the scraps, put them on an old vacant lot, covered up with burlap sacks and worms and then burlap sacks essentially. And the worms would eat through all the scraps essentially and turn over all this old soil into fertile, healthy soil that we would then sell at cost back to farmers for a low cost. And so it was a way to kind of revitalize and green the neighborhood. And that got me deep into soil side. It did work well. Yeah, we had a number of urban farmers that started farming on plots on the south side because of the work that we were doing. And so, that kind of got me deep into soil science, into vermicomposting, into biology, into organics, and just understanding why the soil works the way it works, and how to turn scraps into gold. And so, spent a year doing vermicomposting. Then in 2019, cannabis was legalized from medical to recreational. And so I made the jump from vermicomposting into medical cannabis. And so I was a medical cannabis cultivator for about a year. This looked like going into an office building that was unmarked. I had to wear full scrubs. It was I was in a hospital essentially. And we were on camera at all times. There was a security guard. It was very official. But that kind of got me into genetics, how to train plants, how to grow them for different needs. Really just like into plant breeding. That's really what I got into with the cannabis. Like there's just such a world within cannabis around how to breed better plants, how to get better outcomes, how to get better yields, how to get better terpenes, all that. And so spent a year there. We won second place for best indica for the Cannabis Cup while I was there. And after that year, I loved the work, but I missed being outside. I missed like working with the soil outside. It was like, again, it was very sterile, like a lab environment, a whole different type of farming. And so I moved from Chicago to Georgia and spent a year working at the Rodale Institute, which is where I met Garver, who's currently on our board right now. He's one of our soil science advisors, and worked at the Southeast Organic Center for Rodale, where we were teaching large-scale commercial farmers how to transition over to organic. And so a lot of our work was setting up large-scale trials to, kind of back the data around why organics are better than conventional. And so there I was doing large-scale row crop farming. I was doing tractor farming again. We built a 60-foot greenhouse from top to bottom, just Garver and myself. Set up a lot of different trials. Our scientist won the largest grant for actually carbon sequestration ever in history, in USDA history, so a big deal. That was shouts out to Christy. But yeah, that really just like, again, that was like that deepened my love of farming because Garver had such a wealth of experience and knowledge from farming that he just like passed on to me. And so that just like took it to another level essentially.
Yeah.
But also
and we had Garver on, by the way, so he shared a little bit about that. But you guys were doing some potting soil trials then as well, weren't you? Garver and I had a side quest where we were trying to make our own soil actually. But Rodale was actually all about like in-ground soil actually. We did some stuff around like seed starting, but it wasn't necessarily for the trials. That was just stuff that we were doing on our own. That was just Jules Garver side quest.
That was a Jules Garver side quest. We both love worm castings. We both love potting soil. So we're like, why not try and figure this out? But yeah, that was a side quest. But yeah, spent a year at Rodale. Then moved back to Atlanta, into the city of Atlanta, where I got a job working as an urban farm manager. So I managed an urban farm in the city for 6 months where I was working 5 days a week. The 6th day of the week, I would have a farmer's market, and the 7th day of the week, I would usually do volunteer work. And so it was just like very heavy, intense farming for about 6 months. But we were growing all organic vegetables on the southwest side, very small plot, but like we were growing lots of fruits and vegetables. And so it was very intensive. Super intensive on the soil too. So I was taking a lot of my natural farming stuff, a lot of stuff I learned from Rodale, and applying that onto the farm there. So I was making compost teas. I was doing different natural farming inputs like indigenous microorganisms and applying that to the field. Did that for 6 months, and then
when did you first get into Korean natural farming? Was Garver the one that introduced you to it?
I got into KNF right before I got into cannabis. I was like, around the time I was doing vermicomposting, I was just on the internet, like searching different organic methods. And like the rabbit hole goes so deep. You go to like some random gardening forum and there's some dude from 2006 talking about his methods. And I found natural farming during that time. And Master Cho is passed unfortunately now, but he is the inventor of natural farming. And his whole methodology was to bring farming to like low-cost villagers that can't afford a lot of inputs. And so this was a way to be able to take inputs from your own land and revitalize them and turn them into soil, or turn them into nutrients, and then also use microbes locally and apply that back onto your field. And so, yeah, it's probably about 2019 that I got into natural farming, and it's just stuck with me ever since. It's just made so much sense. And I think before I even knew the science of it, it made sense. And then once I got into vermicomposting, once I got into soil science, once I got into Rodale and we did some more microscopy work, it all added up even more so. And so, I've been...
You're calling it natural farming. Is it not Korean natural farming? Is it just natural farming?
So like Korean natural farming is one wing. Like I would say like natural farming is broader, and then Korean natural farming is within that.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So like natural farming is practiced, they practice it Asia, Africa, Latin America, different parts of Europe. So like it's been used in different areas. And so, but yeah, KNF is like the term that he coined, Master Cho coined himself.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, no, at the end of the time at the urban farm, then you found me via TikTok. And that was early 2022. So like January, February 2022.
Just slid into your TikTok DMs.
Slid TikTok DMs. We had a couple of conversations back and forth. I was like, what is this? Does this even make sense? And now it's
What's
4.5
this
years
weird
later.
biochar thing? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Had you heard of biochar before? Had you used it before?
Yes, and I was actually pretty negative on biochar when you met me. Yeah.
Along with
I
like
had
half the
used
world.
exactly. Yeah, I would say my initial foray into biochar was for cannabis. So just like Googling different recipes online, and people were like, "Oh yeah, try out biochar." And there was all this like hysteria around, "Oh yeah, I put biochar in my media, and it sucked out all the nutrients, and it killed my plants." And so I think a lot of the information online at that time didn't know about inoculation, didn't know about how to
Yeah.
apply it properly. So you can use raw biochar, but it needs to sit longer. And so I used it one time raw in my soil, planted too soon, and my cannabis plants were not happy. Like it took them like 5 or 6 weeks to really get going. They did get going eventually, and they were great, but it took them much longer than it should have. And so
Yeah.
I was very anti-biochar initially, and so I was like, But I will say at Rodale, we were beginning to study biochar on a very like low level, on a low level at Rodale. And so doing some research there, reading some papers, learning from Christy, I was intrigued by it, and I think I saw it as valuable in outdoor cultivation
Yeah.
rather than indoor. And so I think
Yeah.
I was open to outdoor. Indoor was still a little iffy to me.
Yeah,
the
cool.
time.
Well, we'll talk about it more, but let's talk about like what the title soil researcher means. I think we talk about the Rosy Soil Lab, we talk about you and the team of advisors, but like paint us a picture. Like what is the day to day look like? Like long story, what is your job?
What is my job? I ask myself this every day. I'm like, what do I do? Yeah, so I mean, I remember when we came up with this term, we were just like making up term. We're like, well, let's just spitball a term, and soil researcher is what felt right. I mean, my job is formulating these mixes, so that involves research, that involves experimentation, that involves documentation, that involves third-party trials, that involves feedback. And so day to day, like today, I have plants growing for this garden trial. We have garden coming out next month. And so today I had some caterpillars that were just chewing up the tomatoes. So like, early in the morning, it looks like I need to do some IPM before the sun comes up so that I don't burn the tomato
What's
leaves.
IPM?
So IPM is integrated pest management, and I'm using a combination of just Castile soap and water in a spray bottle. It's one of my favorite things to do. Castile soap essentially helps desiccate the bodies of soft body insects, so it dries them out and they die. And so what I do is before the sun comes up, I'm spraying this on my leaves and getting the underside of the leaves where the caterpillars hang out at, and it just coats them for a while. And then as the sun comes out, it dries and it kills them and they fall off and we're good. And so IPM is a lot of my work, honestly. If I don't keep up with it, especially indoor, it's a big mess. It's research. So again, like I think biochar is still early in that there's a lot more research coming out, but it's very broad. It's still not very conclusive on like, all right, what are biochar limits? How is it useful? When is it detrimental? And so I think it's looking up latest research trends. And so what are we using biochar for now? What's the latest biochar feedstock? How is it being applied? At what percentages? In combination with what inputs? And so doing research around the latest stuff coming out, and a lot of trialing. So it's a lot of mixing up different inputs together, seeing how plants growing them, see how they hold water, see how the pH and the EC looks, see how it affects the nutrient holding capacity. Yeah, I would say I feel like the majority of my work is like failing a lot. I've killed significantly more plants than I've grown successfully, like probably 10 times so. Significantly so, especially when I get into a new type of soil that I don't know anything about. And so, yeah, a lot of trial and error, a lot of research, a lot of formulation, experimentation, and then feedback from outside sources. So that could be retailers, that could be other growers, that could be my soil advisory board, and hearing from them like, okay, what are the flaws that you see in this mix? What is some new input that you've never heard of? Give me an idea, and let me go do some research on that. And so it's a lot of just filtering information from outsiders, from customers, and then seeing what makes sense and applying it back to the mix. Lots of chaos every day. And then, yeah, I'll say that's a lot of it.
Yeah, basically killing a ton of plants. So our
Killing a
customers
ton
don't
of
have to.
plants. A lot of failure, mostly failure. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, on that same vein, like as you think back over the last 4 years, what do you think has been the single hardest thing about trying to create a peat-free mix? What do you feel like has been the biggest hurdle, maybe that we've overcome, maybe that we have yet to overcome? Yeah, what were you banging your head against the wall for?
The biggest hurdle, I think, I mean, for a while it was pH. So we know the biochar typically has a high pH, even though it doesn't affect the soil greatly. I think not using an acidic input like peat, it's very difficult to have an ideal pH between 6 and 7, 7.5 maybe. And so I was banging my head against the wall trying to find a peat replacement that was low in acidity and that wasn't exceptionally high in salts or anything else like that. And so, yeah, one of the main things honestly is input sourcing, like finding new inputs. There's very limited inputs that are available. And so finding something that replaces peat properly has been very difficult. Honestly, I think we're still on that track right now. We have something that we're using that's a recycled paper product that is similar to peat, has very similar properties, has less downsides in my opinion, is produced well at scale, is sustainable, but I'm not 100% sure it's the solution at the moment. And so I think it's finding that these inputs that are sustainable, that are cost effective, and that boost plant performance. And finding those three is very difficult. And especially as we scale. I think now, as we scale the company, it's so easy to find quality compost or quality biochar that's very small. But then once we're scaled and we're selling 20,000, 30,000 bags a month, it's a lot harder to find a compost provider that's sourcing quality compost, that's making it, that's testing it, that's doing QA on it. And so I think really like my hurdle that I'm seeing right now is scaling. Like how do we keep the quality as we scale? I think we've been the highest quality soil for the last few years, no doubt. And the question is, how do we not lose that as we scale? And how do we keep that commitment to the customers, to quality, to sustainability without folding on certain values?
Yeah. So if I had to just recap, it's kind of quality input sourcing and sort of consistency. And so, it depends on the region, right? But if you're a grower trying to make a mix, trying to replace peat, it sounds like your answer would be spend a ton of time on getting your inputs right.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, get your inputs right. That's like, I think by far is the hardest thing to do. There's very limited options, especially options that are, again, in the US, sustainable, local, and we've found a way to do that against all the odds. Yeah, and so I think it's like a miracle that we've done that, but it's not easy by any means. We've done, obviously we've done a lot of research to find these inputs.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's talk biochar. What is biochar? Just for the average person who's never heard of it or has heard 17 different definitions of it, like how do you describe it to someone?
Yeah, biochar is great. So I tell people often, like, I think the first thing I tell them is, you've probably seen biochar without even knowing it. Biochar is any organic matter that has been burned at high heat and low oxygen environments. And so that sounds crazy, but like imagine a piece of wood after a bonfire that's been left out overnight. And the next day you get to it and it's brittle, it cracks, it's kind of like almost glassy in nature. That would be a very rudimentary form of biochar. That is one way to make it. But essentially the idea is we're burning all the organic matter out of any type of, it could be a piece of corn, or it could be a corn stalk, it could be kudzu, it could be whatever. But burn out all the organic matter until all you have left is carbon. And so all the volatiles are gone, all the organic matter is gone. You just have carbon in a stable form that can sit in the soil for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so it could be a piece of wood after a bonfire that sits out. It could be a piece of pecan shell that we are intentionally putting in a pyrolysis machine and getting out. There's different levels of biochar. But very basic is burnt organic matter, that everything has been burnt off except for the carbon. So that's biochar. It's great for the soil because when you look at biochar up close, it's filled with micro and macropores depending on the way that it was burnt. And these are, both micro and macropores are helping hold airspace and also water as well. And so biochar is able to hold space for microbes for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And those microbes are holding moisture, they're holding water, they're holding nutrients, and they're forming other connections with the roots, with other microbes, with critters in the soil. And so this is kind of just giving like your workers in the soil free housing for an indefinite period of time. Like you really can't beat it. And so in my head, biochar is like an amendment that raises the overall quality of your soil. And that can work in organic soils, that can work in inorganic soils, that can work in poor soils, it can work in good soils. It's just a carrier for nutrients, moisture, and microbes. That's going to improve any soil. And so I think there's huge benefits to it. It needs to be applied in the right way. But it's beneficial, I would say, across the board very consistently.
Yeah. And which of those benefits, like across, drainage, nutrient retention, microbial diversity, even, carbon capture, which we can talk about, like which of those do you think matters the most in a potting substrate?
I think the question would be a potting substrate for what plants? If we're talking indoor, I would probably lean towards maybe nutrient retention, maybe structure. If we're leaning outdoor, I would say I'd be more focused on the microbes. I think microbes are going to be a lot more abundant and active in a soil that's consistently being wet and dried and that's outside, as opposed to a soil that's inside. The microbes are still active, but not on the same scale. And so for indoor, I would say the benefit is you need to water less, you need to fertilize less. And so you can back off a little bit, and your plants are still going to be very happy. Outdoor, I would say the biochar is making sure that nutrients are cycling properly. So the microbes are in there. Whatever you're applying into the soil, the microbes are chewing this up and then turning into nutrients and giving it back to your plants. And so, yeah, it has different benefits depending on what plant you're growing. I would say that.
And then how do you think about it in the context of, because that's mostly chemical and biological, but how do you think of it in the context of physical? Like what sort of structural improvements does biochar make, and perhaps what are some of the drawbacks on the structural side as well?
Yeah, I mean, on the structural side, I would say, again, since it's holding microbes, these microbes are also creating soil tilth. So they're creating structure in the soil through their, so like, I believe it's fungi do something called chelation, where essentially they're like breaking down different things in the soil that are then holding soil structure and holding it together. And so that's going to help with erosion. So these microbes are very helpful in terms of like building a structure that is healthy for the roots that they can dig into. That's long term. That has nutrients in it. I think honestly, I think the biggest thing is the soil tilth. Like it's just the structure is immensely different when you have microbes that are able to build a structure in the soil, and that has a lot of benefits.
Cool. And then I think following that theme of biological testing, microbial diversity, all of that leading to nutrient cycling, and here like soil structure, like when you talk to more on the grower side about living soil versus sterile soils, like how do you think folks should think about living soils, and what are some recommendations you have for them to start moving in that direction?
I think this conversation is very interesting. I think so. When people talk about sterile soils, they're typically talking about a potting soil that, like a basic potting soil you're going to see in Home Depot has typically been sterilized in an oven at high heat. And so what this oven is doing is just burning off all the microbial life. And so essentially you're getting like a blank slate, no good, no bad in there, just neutral. Again, anything can get into that. Whereas we have an opposite idea where it's like we're going to inoculate our soil with healthy microorganisms that are then going to be able to fight off any pathogenic bacteria or fungi. And so the downside of that is there is a chance always that you're going to have pathogenic fungi or bacteria, and so it can go bad, which is why a lot of people just sterilize entirely. I do, to be honest, think that there is uses for sterile soils versus living soils. I think it depends on your application, where you're at, how you're growing. But a living soil, I would say, is beneficial because, again, you have the workers in the soil, the microbes, the bacteria, that are forming associations with your root zone and that are also breaking down any nutrients that are coming into the soil. So essentially, if you're applying nutrients that aren't synthetic into a soil without any microbes, nothing is breaking it down. There's nothing in the soil that's able to just feed it. Whereas synthetics, you're feeding plants nutrients that are typically already broken down. You're giving them like a McDouble, essentially. You're feeding it right to them. Whereas instead, like with organics, it's like, okay, here's a sweet potato, I'm throwing it in the soil. Well, there's no workers to cook this in the oven. It's just going to sit there for a while. And so I would say what the microbes are doing is they're making those associations between the plants and the soil and the nutrients much easier. And so I think actually living soil is a much easier system, though it is an adjustment learning how to dial it in, how to water properly, maybe how to mulch, how to keep the microbes happy, things like that.
Yeah, cool. And then, similar question on the biochar side, like for growers who are thinking about incorporating biochar, where do you recommend they start? And what are some of the kind of potholes they might run into along the way that you try to help them avoid?
Yeah, so the first pothole I would say is don't apply raw biochar to your soil. That's the pothole that I fell into. Raw biochar has its use, it's great, but it should be applied, maybe in the winter going into the spring when you have a fallow period, when you have time for the soil just to sit. But I think a good intro to biochar for a lot of growers is if you're already using compost in your soil, try a compost biochar mix. And so we have plant food, we also have biochar booster. I think biochar booster would be the ideal. But essentially biochar biochar that's been inoculated with compost. So it's sat for a while. All the microbes and all the nutrients from the compost is now inoculated in the biochar, which is going to sit in your soil for a long time. It's not going to break down. It's not going to wash out. It's not going to go away. And every time you fertilize and water, the biochar is holding this and then bringing it back into your soil. And so I think the easiest way to start is just try a biochar compost. You know, if you're using 10% compost in your soil mix, try 10%. Try a biochar compost at 10%. And I think it's going to boost the benefits of the biochar, and it's also going to boost the benefits of the soil entirely. It's going to boost the benefits of the compost and the soil entirely. But that's a very easy way to start. That's not going to be a huge departure from how you're typically growing, and it won't throw people off that much.
Yeah, cool. And then what should they be looking for? You know, at 2 weeks, at 6 weeks after a full growing cycle, like what do you expect to see from that biochar application?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think like the way I'm with soil, I know it's not ideal for business. I think from a soil perspective, soil is very slow and it's a time thing. And so I don't think biochar is going to be input that you're typically going to see very fast returns from. But I do think if you're someone that focuses on your soil, that is working with it day to day, you will see those changes eventually. And I would say typically around 6 to 8 weeks is when I start to see like the benefits of biochar really kick in. I would say outdoors, I'm seeing it right now in our garden trials. I'm seeing less need for watering. And so as it gets really hot outside, I would say sometimes I probably have to roll back watering by like 10 to 15%. So maybe I don't need to water every day sometimes in the summertime. But I think watering is ideal. You need to water less. Fertilization, I don't have to fertilize quite as often with biochar. If you give it a few consistent fertilizations throughout the season, it's going to maintain, it's going to hold that. And so I think those are the things I'd be looking for, probably at about 6 to 8 weeks. I think another thing I would look for is at the end of your growth cycle, if you're growing in a pot, I would pull the plant out and look at your roots. I think the root zone is the main thing that biochar is benefiting, especially when used in tandem with compost or vermicompost. And so I definitely see it in the root structure at the end of the grow period. And that's going to affect water holding capacity, that's going to hold nutrients, that's going to affect microbial diversity. And so the roots are really like, I think, the secret to it. But you won't see that unless you're taking it out at the end of the trial and seeing what it looks like.
Yeah, cool. And how do you recommend people structure trials? If they wanted to get started, like how do you try to limit some of the variables, some of the noise, all that good stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd say the main thing is like, have fun with it. Do what you truly like. I feel like so much of the reason I got into this work is like, I was just doing that stuff for fun, just being like, all right, what happens if I try this? How will it affect my cannabis or my veggies or, my orchids or whatever? And so I think my initial structure would be use what you're used to. So use your go-to and then use an experimental and try to keep them like, try to do everything the same. So water the same, do IPM the same, have them the same pot size, the same mulch. If they're getting different sun or the different grow lights, change them to different positions so they're receiving the same stuff over time. And so, but the main thing I would do is run like your experimental versus your current and just take rigorous notes on that and see what you see. And that's just a really fun way to see, is this beneficial? Is this a waste of time, a waste of money? And oftentimes you will like find little ways to tweak your soil and grow better than you've grown in the past.
Mm-hmm. Great. And on that note, like what's like one soil habit or assumption you wish more growers would rethink? You got any hot takes? One soil habit
which growers would rethink. Ooh. How hot do I want to go? How spicy do I want to go with it? This might be crazy because I work for an organic soil company, but I do think if you decide to grow synthetic, if you decide to use chemical inputs, biochar has a lot of benefits for those soils as well. And that's actually something that we learned at Rodale, was that the biochar is still holding the nutrients from synthetic chemicals as well. And so I think there's a lot of like, you should be organic, you should be synthetic. I'm definitely an organic person. That's what I believe in. I believe in natural farming. But I do think biochar has benefits way beyond just organics as well. And so I do think people could use this in a hydroponic setup, an aquaponic setup, a synthetic setup, and still see the benefits of biochar. And so I think there needs to be more crossing of the line of honestly biochar into synthetics as well, because it's extremely beneficial. It's a great fertilizer. It's a great nutrient retention. And it still will hold some of those microbes that those fertilizers might be killing off a little bit. And so, yeah, I kind of want to see more cohesion actually between the two sides. We're on the organic side, but I do think we have a lot of ways that we could be helping synthetic growers as well.
Totally.
And
Cool.
maybe they see the magic of biochar and then move towards organics. You know, maybe maybe that happens. Who knows?
Cool. And I guess on that note, like as you're thinking about the future of this space and just the industry at large, like what are some of the next wave trends or technologies or application styles you're getting super excited about?
I think for us, like, I really am excited to see, we're seeing biochar growing in popularity. And I think that's largely due to like a lot of the research that's being done out there. A lot of great researchers doing work. But I think I would love to see more feedstocks of biochar. And so right now, kind of the go-to is a southern white pine. It's a byproduct of the lumber industry. But biochar is so beautiful because every single feedstock completely changes the way that it affects the biochar. And so I could take a southern white pine, I could take a bamboo, I could take an acorn, I could take a corn stalk and fire them at the same heat. And they might have different micropores and macropores. And again, these micropores and macropores are affecting airspace, they're affecting water holding capacity, they're affecting carbon content, they're affecting microbial diversity. And so I think like there's so many different feedstocks that we haven't even tried to make char out of yet. Like I'm very excited to find one day like a bamboo biochar at scale. Obviously we're using a pecan shell biochar now, which I think is a whole different world. Pecan, super high in lignin content, breaks down very slowly, very high carbon content, higher than most woods actually. And so I'm excited to see like what different features of biochar can we unlock if we use different feedstocks. I think there's actually a whole bigger world and there's many different ways to use biochar. And I think we can actually incorporate more biochar in a mix if we have a diversity of different biochars. And so that's kind of like what I'm very excited about. Like some like designer special chars. So like bamboo, horsetail, nutshell, anything. Yeah.
Designer chars. I love it. Let's get
designer
some.
chars. Yeah. So I'm excited for it.
All right, sweet. Well, I know we're kind of coming up on time here. Is there anything I didn't ask, anything you're excited to chat about, or do you think is relevant to this conversation?
Excited to chat about. Yeah, I think like what I want people to go home with is like I think biochar. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a one size fits all, but I think it can have a use for every single grower. So you can adapt biochar to your grow style. So you can apply it at different rates or different type of biochar or different size of biochar. So a ground biochar versus a large particulate biochar might offer different benefits, versus more watering capacity versus more structure in the soil. And so I would love to see more people trial biochar at small percentages in their soils and see how it can benefit them. I think there's much more application for it than currently exists out there. And a lot of it just needs to be trials. It needs to be growers and farmers just trying stuff. And that's usually what we do. That's how we get into this stuff. But I think the adoption requires like moving from indoor growers to possibly like outdoor growers and people that are just like DIY in their backyard having fun. And once they really catch on, I think it's wraps for biochar. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, for folks that want to follow along, more or learn more along the lines of what we were talking about, how can they follow you? And then are there any resources that you recommend for people to go deeper on this stuff?
Yeah. Follow me, Rosy Soil, social media. Just follow Rosy. Shout out Maddie. Follow Rosy Soil, great page. Doing great work over there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Justin Jules Giuliano. And sorry, what was the second question?
Just any resources if people want to go deeper on this stuff.
So they just changed their name. It was the US Biochar Initiative. I think it's now American Biochar Initiative, maybe? American Biochar something, but it was initially the United States Biochar Initiative. But essentially what they're doing is they're taking they're the place that has the directory for all the biochar in North America. They have a lot of different researchers on their team. They have some articles on their website. And so I think like that's a good place to just plug in and find out who's doing biochar around you, read some articles, read some like deep research, and kind of just get a better understanding of what is biochar, how is it useful for me, and what should I do with it.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, Jules, thanks so much for coming on. This is super fun chatting with you, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.